Today on CityCast Chicago, one of Mayor Brandon Johnson's first announcements when he took office was to create a task force to solve Chicago's so-called pension crisis, and it comes up a lot. Funding pensions is one of the reasons the city says it's building that new casino, and it comes up every time we talk about the city budget. But let's be real. I ain't got no idea what's actually going on with Chicago's pensions. That's why I'm here with Dr. Amanda Cass, a DePaul University professor who studies this. It's Monday, June 12th. I'm Jacoby Cochran, and this is what Chicago is talking about. Amanda, welcome to CityCast Chicago.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
Amanda, I know this work is important to you. You've written so much about it, but I bet this question comes up a lot. Why should everyday Chicagoans who don't work for the city care about the city's pension obligations?
So there's a couple of reasons. I think the biggest one is that the pension systems, at the end of the day, they're paying for the benefits for city employees. So we should view this as part of the overall cost of city services. So anything you're connected with the city, whether it's streets and sanitation, parks, there's the salary for the employees, but there's also their pension benefits.
Okay, and I believe there are 4 major pension systems that Chicago is required to fund. How many employees make up those?
The city of Chicago is only responsible for 4 pension systems. There's one for police officers, one for firefighters, one for municipal employees, and one for laborers. The number of current employees is somewhere between 60,000 people, current employees. Then there's also retirees that are members of the pension system. It's garbage men, anybody who's working for the city of Chicago. So people that are working in the Department of Housing, the various commissioners, deputy mayors, anybody who's in a city office. So anybody that's got a, City of Chicago email address is going to be likely in the Municipal Employees Benefit Fund.
So many of us right now are focused on our own retirement accounts and will they be there for us? Will Social Security have our backs by the time we're there? Why is it important that we care about retirees having benefits?
I think that we should care because there's a huge social cost to not funding retirement benefits. So if you think about it, let's say we had a magic wand and we said, all right, we're going to cut benefits for existing retirees. Well, I think there's a moral question to that of, have we just created an impoverished elderly population in our city? And we're taking away something that we promised people. But also there's a cost to it, right? There's a cost to having an impoverished elderly population that's maybe more reliant on social services and public programs. So it's not the case that we can, just cut benefits and magically resolve the problem. Maybe we cut the amount of money that the city has to put into the pension systems, but we just created a whole new set of problems.
No, I'm thinking exactly what you're talking about. It's like the way that would impact our housing system, the way that would impact our medical system if we just turn our back on individuals. Okay, so we got 4 major systems making up, like you said, municipal employees, laborers, police, firefighters, somewhere between 50, 60,000. Can you explain how those pensions are funded?
Yeah, at a basic level, the way that you fund a pension system is there's 3 sources of revenue. Money coming in from current employees. So as you're working, a portion of your salary goes into your pension system to pay for benefits when you retire. Money also comes in from your employer. In this case, the city of Chicago is the employer. Those 2 sources of money get pooled together and invested. And so it's the combination of employee, employer contributions and investment returns that's supposed to create a pot of money that's enough that when you retire, that pot of money pays out your benefit.
When we say that pensions are underfunded, which I've been hearing for most of my adult life, how underfunded are they? What do we mean by that?
So when we're talking about underfunding, first thing to know is that this isn't money that would ever get paid out all at once, right? There's people who are retired right now, but there's also people who aren't going to retire for another 20, 30 years. Underfunding means that the value of benefits, so the cost of retirement income, to the value of assets, so money that we currently have in the bank. So if a pension system is underfunded, what that means is that the value of all benefits exceeds assets.
Understood. So for an entire pension system, if you need $100 to fund the people who are retired right now and the people who are working towards retirement right now, and you got $100 in the bank, you're fully funded. If you got anything less than $100, even if you're able to pay for the current people who are retired, you are underfunded.
Exactly. And Chicago's systems right now, combined, the four systems, they're only about 24% funded. So using that example, or using $1, which is maybe more simple. If we've got $1 of the total value of benefits, we've only got 24 cents in the bank.
Got it. And is that right now, we hear so much about crisis. Are we at a point where people who are retired and receiving benefits, where they are looking up and they might not receive them? Or do we have enough money to pay for people who are currently retired or maybe retiring in the next couple of years?
The systems have enough money to pay out the benefits. I think the rhetoric of crisis masks what are different issues. So there's a couple of different issues when we're talking about a pension system. One is about the solvency of the pension systems themselves, meaning, do they have enough money to send retirees their monthly checks? A crisis happens if the pension system completely runs out of assets and literally checks halt. We're not in that situation right now. That's a true crisis. On the flip side, when pension systems are underfunded, to increase their funding level, so to get from only 24% funded up to that 100%, it requires more money from the employer, which is the city of Chicago. That creates a budget crunch for the city's overall finances. And that's oftentimes what we're really talking about, is the pain point in the city's budget of increasing how much money they're putting into the pension systems.
How much of city revenue goes to these four pension funds on a percentage base?
As a percentage base, I don't know off the top of my head, but the city's total budget is about $16-17 billion, and the payment to the pension system is about $3 billion. So
about 18%?
That sounds about right.
Oh my Lord, that is a good amount, almost 1/5 of the city budget.
It's going to pensions. It's a significant amount. And again, the big thing to pay attention to is when people, especially elected officials, are talking about pension systems and the city's pension systems, we need to scrutinize, what are they actually talking about? Are they talking about the health of the pension systems themselves, or are they really talking about the city's budget or the state budget? And that's also what's gotten us into this problem, is that for decades, underfunding the pension systems was a way to resolve budget deficits. And that's what dug us into this problem.
I don't want to make too clean of a comparison, but when I think about like conversations at the federal level around the debt ceiling, the plan that ultimately was moved forward cut social services. Is that the system we find ourselves in, where we're constantly pitting increased services in our communities against increased contributions to the pension fund? And is that sustainable?
I think that is the how it historically has been. I think if you look at the rhetoric of now Mayor Johnson, when he was candidate Johnson, I think that he's trying to change that dynamic and looking for a path that doesn't pit the cost of benefits against current services.
Yeah. Have we had any examples in the last few administrations where decisions to provide more money to pension or services has sort of led to the other being underfunded or having funded stripped?
It's a little complicated because during Mayor Lightfoot's tenure, she climbed that pension ramp, so she increased substantially the amount of money going to the pension systems, but she also had this infusion of federal dollars from the COVID relief packages. And so we didn't see a situation where there had to be a trade-off between services and pensions. I think for Johnson, again, there isn't that infusion of the COVID money, so they are potentially facing that situation. Because the pension systems are so underfunded, the city of Chicago's contributions have to increase going forward to shore up the funding levels. So to get them from, again, only 24% funded up to state law requires that they get up to 90% funded in 2055 and 2058. So that's going to require an increase in the city contributions going forward. Now, the city actually already made big jumps in its contributions. That's what former Mayor Lightfoot referred to as climbing the pension ramp. So the city has climbed that ramp, but it has to maintain the high level of pension payments going forward for decades.
Why are the pensions so underfunded, especially with the amount of financial strain they put on the city?
So for years, the amount of money that the city was putting into the pension systems had nothing to do with the financial health of the pension systems. So they were kind of divorced from one another. So what happened is unfunded liabilities are a form of debt. You can kind of almost think of it like credit card debt. You've got the original debt, and then it's going to snowball and grow from interest over time if you don't pay down that debt. So for years, the city of Chicago, the unfunded liabilities or debt to the pension system, it grew and grew and grew and grew and grew. Then we had the financial crisis, ballooned it even further. And so that's why they're so underfunded today.
It sounds like basically the city was paying like the monthly minimum, right? They were just paying that basic rate, but what they needed to be paying should have been going up in relationship to sort of that rising need. But that wasn't happening. What time frame was this, and why didn't the city, take any action on this?
Yeah, there's a couple reasons. So the pension systems, interestingly, they were well funded back in the late 90s. And so when they were well funded for two of the pension systems, benefits were actually increased. So again, one of the kind of problems is the city increased benefits without attaching a way to actually pay for those benefits. And then the problem started kind of materializing in the early 2000s. But again, there was no mechanism in place to address the problem.
I mean, they say they have a plan. I know Mayor Johnson has put together a task force, and this is no shot at the mayor, but anytime I hear that a task force has been put together in Chicago to address a problem, I wonder if that's just a meeting that's never going to happen with a budget that's never going to get used. Do you think that this plan will actually come to fruition, that we are on the right track to getting these funds where they need to be?
I think the commission actually makes a lot of sense, because one of the other concerns, which we didn't touch on, is that back after the last financial crisis, there was major legislation that cut benefits for new hires. They're in a reduced benefit tier that's referred to as Tier 2. And there's actually concern that the Tier 2 benefit level is so low that it violates a federal provision called the Safe Harbor provision. So there's concern that we need to actually increase the benefit level for people who are in Tier 2. What's the cost of fixing Tier 2? What's the risk that the pension systems are going to run out of money in the short term? And also looking at it holistically from the city's budget perspective of what payment level can the city make without substantially cutting services. I think it makes sense to have a commission to look at those three issues and try and come up with what's the best plan for Chicago going forward.
I mean, the more I listen to you, Amanda, it sounds like Brandon Johnson is really facing a not only complicated, but a seemingly impossible situation. He doesn't have the COVID dollars. Is trying to figure out how to raise revenues without raising property taxes around the city. And yet we still have to continue to contribute to the pension fund in an increased amount moving forward just to hit that goal. Do you think his administration will be able to make a dent in this?
I think that actually we should be viewing this as a long-term problem. And so I don't think that we should expect Mayor Johnson to resolve the problem in 4 years. I think that a kind of focus on the short term is partially what has kind of gotten us into this problem, or in perpetuated kind of the discourse being about a pension crisis. We need to view it as a long-term challenge that kind of slow and steady is the way to resolve it.
I think it's so easy for people when they hear dates like 2055 or 2058 to think that that number just sort of pushes this problem down the road. But the truth is that's the type of time we need to be thinking about these problems 30 years out. How do we create 30-year plans that can live across administrations, that can live across demographic shifts and changes in our city? But I feel like we just haven't been really prepped to think about that, even though I think every problem that faces our city, whether it's houselessness, whether it's trying to improve access to youth programs, addressing violence and environmental change, these are all 30, 40, 50-year projects.
I think what you're saying, not just about pensions, but these other problems that we have in this city, these are problems that are the result of decades of policy choices and decades of disinvestment. And I think if we're talking about, put aside the pensions for a second, but some of the other issues that you're talking about of gun violence, disinvestment in particular communities, one of the issues is we have a mismatch between the need and how long it's going to take to really turn things around, right? We have pressing problems in communities that people want and need resolved quickly. And unfortunately, these things, as you said, they take decades to turn around. They take decades to resolve.
Well, Dr. Cass, I appreciate you not only being a fan of CityCast Chicago, but coming on to talk about one of the topics that, I'm going to be real, I was embarrassed to ask about. I was learning on my own, but I really needed somebody to come in and do an explainer, and I'm sure many of our CityCast listeners needed the same thing. So thank you so much for making time for us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Before I let you go, a little bit of news, y'all. Chicago Public Schools head of special education, Stephanie Jones, has resigned following claims the district continues its unlawful use of physical restraints on students. Jones also received a no confidence vote from Chicago Teachers Union. Movies in the Park begins this week with showings at 8 different parks across the city between tomorrow and Saturday. For a link to the full lineup, check the show notes. Also, make sure you head over to Hey Chicago, our daily newsletter. Between the latest news and events, Sydney's got a quick how-to for checking Chicago's air quality, and it goes without saying, it's not all that great. And some good news. This Thursday, I'm hosting Grown Folks Stories at the Promontory in Hyde Park. Stop by, donate $5, put your name in the hat, and you can come up and tell a 5-minute story. A link is available in the show notes. As always, I appreciate you for listening. I'm going to talk to you bright and early tomorrow. Peace.
The pension systems, in terms of their funding levels, I somewhat think of it as a carrier ship. And we're trying to turn a carrier ship. That's a slow, steady process that you need to kind of keep calm and do incrementally to get that 180 turn.
Simone is so funny. She was like, what happened in the Suez Canal?
Yeah.